Good morning or good afternoon. This is Russell Hendrickson with PDS. Thank you for joining us. So with that, physician compensation reporting, I don't ever want to say that it was easy, but certainly the metrics that organizations were using were usually fairly simple, whether it was a straight percentage of reimbursement or looking at something like you have on the screen here where potentially we're using just straight productivity metrics, and those metrics could even be tiered so that there was higher levels of reimbursement for higher tiers against typically some kind of a benchmark or just an earned salary role. I don't ever want to say it was easy, but the metrics behind it were fairly simple. And so many organizations were able to do the kind of things that we're showing on the screen here. Where we're headed today is we need to be able to encompass and handle how the changes in reimbursement are coming from the payers in particular, as well as ensuring that we're driving the highest levels of quality. So what you're looking at here now is today's compensation or possibly tomorrow's, depending upon where your organization sits. We have a wider variety of metrics. We need to be able to encompass not only productivity type metrics like we had in our old plans, but we also need to be able to look at whether it's clinicals, patient satisfaction metrics, other quality scores, and we need to be able to look at them both individually as well as for the organization and still provide those types of visualizations. So how do we get to this? How do we take all this information and make it meaningful? And that's the topic for today's webinar. What's really driving what we need is the changes in healthcare, moving from volume to quality, right? And that's really driving the needs for the physician comp models and the changes that I was just showing. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So today's topics will include, the challenges with calculating physician comp, both currently and where we're headed. What are some of the right benchmarks and KPIs, different ways to present that information? How can we visually present information both to management and physicians and use analytics to both highlight trends and ultimately identify the gaps to improve performance gaps that will translate directly to higher reimbursement for the organization and then drive how that's related to physicians and getting their engagement. We'll also show at the end of the webinar at least one way where dashboards can even be predictive or identify what is the next level, what are the performance changes that need to be made so we can move that physician to the next tier in their compensation, ultimately maximizing their work efforts. So with that, I'd like to introduce Scott Everett. Scott is the Vice President of Revenue Analytics here at PDS.
Thanks, Russ. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. I'm glad to talk to you today about the physician compensation modeling and the opportunities that's out there. It's certainly a timely topic with regard to what's going on in healthcare right now. In my travels and in speaking with clients and speaking with people I meet at conferences or really anywhere I go, I hear a lot of people talking about, well, the payers are changing the way they're going to pay us. Our reimbursement methodology is completely changing, and we need to find a way to get the providers on board. A lot of times their incentives are different. In some ways there may even be contradictory, and so we need to look at ways that we can incentivize our providers to help the organization meet the goals as a whole. And so what can we do in terms of compensation plans when we're going to be reimbursed a great deal on a per member per month basis? How are we going to do it when there are non-monetary incentives attached, things like quality incentives and risk acuity scoring, access rates, or patient satisfaction? All of these things may factor into the reimbursements that we're getting from the payers. So how can we drive our providers to have the behavior needed in order to help our organization meet those goals and maximize our reimbursement while helping our providers maximize their compensation? We also understand that compensation is a competitive factor, that it's a way for organizations to recruit providers and their compensation plans being fair, being quality, and having providers that are satisfied with that is going to be a huge incentive with retaining and attracting new providers. So with all of this in mind, I'd kind of like to move on and if we could just do a quick survey. And I'd really like to understand, in your organization, do you already have these in place to have incentivizations for quality or access metrics, things like that? So Russ, if you wouldn't mind putting up the poll question.
Should be up on your screen here. I'm going to launch out the poll. And there's 4 choices here to answer the poll. The question, again, to reiterate, is do you have incentive plans that are non-productivity based or non-reimbursement based. We try to differentiate, yes, we're currently doing it, or yes, we're going to be doing it. It's already planned out and in place. It just hasn't been either fully deployed or it's in next year's plan, versus no, we don't formally have it planned, and no, we don't have any plans at all. I think it's always useful to see how other organizations are doing and where they are in their planning process. So almost 85% have voted in. So with that, I'm going to close out the poll here. Scott, you should see the result in just 1 second.
This is actually interesting to see. It looks like about half of the respondents have it in place, where they have in their current plan different quality initiatives or access initiatives which come into play. Looks like another 10% or so are having it coming up, and another quarter of the respondents are looking at it, they're planning for it, but they may not be able to get where they go now, and another 15% say, nope, we've got what we want and we're planning on staying there. So it's good to see, and I understand that, those who may not be there now or trying to get there, because it's really difficult. I know a lot of the times we hear from our clients how time-consuming and labor-intensive physician compensation can be. I know I worked for a large provider organization, and we had 4 analysts that did nothing but physician compensation full-time, doing the reporting, doing the analysis, the calculation, the modeling, all of this, and I asked a colleague there once if they were planning on adding new factors or anything. This was on a straight RVU calculation, and he said we'd have to double our staff if we wanted to make any changes to the comp plan. So no, there are no changes in the works. And I can certainly understand from an expense standpoint of organizationally, it takes a long time to do that. And I also understand that there may be those who, and sympathize with those who have multiple compensation plans in one organization, the difficulty to administer, to put all that together, and to get all of the data that a lot of times comes from different sources to try to aggregate it and put it in one place. And so I completely understand the difficulty and complexity of physician compensation reporting. And as if managing your own data wasn't enough, a lot of times in order to make it effective, you want to incorporate external data sources, things like benchmarks. You want to look at things, where should they be based on an AMGA or MGMA tiered salary structure? Or what if the providers want to look at the different factors that are involved in the compensation plan? They want to be able to have a level of self-management and look at the context within the metrics there to see how each one really impacts what goes on. And then I know you look at that last bullet, comparison to peers, and that may be the most frightening thing a lot of people see today. But we do have some clients who are doing this. It's not a lot, but it's something that can be very effective in driving behavior when it's used effectively. All of these add just more and more complexity to compensation reporting. And as we look at it, and we need to be successful this way, there are a lot of challenges. So, Russ, in an ideal world, what's the key in order to make all of this work?
Well, and the answer to that is clearly automation, right? So it's how do we automate our whole processes from gathering the information, ensuring we have the right information, and then driving those capabilities. And usually the answer to that, of course, is technology, and directly ties into, right, analytics, data warehousing, data modeling. So the key here is how do we optimize, and I think the answer would be through automation.
And I would certainly agree with that. Automation really is the key. You need to drive down the intensity of the activity within that. So I know a lot of times people ask, well, what should really be involved in the plan? And if we're trying to take automation into account, we want it to be simple, but at the same time, we need to have a philosophical approach to creating a compensation plan. And the first step really should be the compensation plan needs to reflect what the organizational goals are. And this may be whether it's a reimbursement goal of, we want to model how we're getting reimbursed by our payers, or if it's a mission-based goal where quality, patient satisfaction, and safety are paramount, and we want to make sure that those are adequately represented in the way that we incentivize our physicians. And those things need to be put into place and need to be accurately reflected in the calculations. Understanding also that there has to be balance in everything, that a lot of the providers are providing non-monetary contributions to the organization, whether it's in administration and management, whether it's in helping to coordinate quality and patient safety initiatives. A lot of these are out there, and again, you're part of a team, and that really the team is accountable for the organization reaching its goals as well. So I know a lot of times it's tough to get the physicians on board with this, and really what is it that they want from a compensation plan. And I know a lot of times, obviously not all physicians are the same, but the common themes that I find in talking to them are that they want the compensation calculations to be accurate every time. They want them to be consistent. They don't want a lot of little hidden variables popping up. They don't want the calculations to be so complex that the accuracy is at risk in the way that it's calculated. But most of all, and most importantly, they want the process to be transparent. They don't want to think anything is being hidden from them. They want you to communicate with them what's going on. They want to know, what are the factors going into the way that they're currently compensated. They want to know projections based upon what they're doing right now. Where are they going to end up the year? And they want to know what are some success factors or gaps or behaviors that they may be able to change in order to maybe be, maximize their reimbursement to be really more where they want to be. So what we really want to do, these are kind of the key goals, and Russ, maybe you can speak to or show some ways that people are accomplishing this.
We've been using the term, and this was an interesting thing, we've been using the term modeling and really meaning to model out plans that match the goals of the organization and the quality incentives that we're seeing as part of our reimbursement. In this case, though, I want to talk about modeling the data that drives those plans. And so there's a number of different factors here when you talk from a technology side, and we've touched on these, but things like productivity metrics, payroll metrics, other contractual type inputs like physician comp guarantees. Then we have clinical quality metrics, which present a challenge in and of themselves, and certainly any other components that might be part of your compensation plans, whether it's education, training, citizenship. Then to add to that, in a multi-specialty organization or a large health system, we're going to have different plan parameters and different types of plans. And if you're in a very large organization where you might have 20 or 25 different clinical departments, you might have multiple variations on plan parameters against even though your same core components that have to be addressed. How do we do that from a technology side? This is where I like to use the term data modeling, which is really, we've got to be able to bring in the data at whatever level it is. We have to then stage the data, what I call data modeling, translate the data so it's structured to answer the business questions that are required both for management, for the analytical tools, and then certainly to publish out visualizations and dashboards for the users that are going to be interacting with the data to make it easy and somewhat seamless. From a technical side, a relational database here, smaller organizations, many organizations that are doing things in Excel, but going a little further, if you're a larger organization, Excel isn't going to drive that. You might be able to use Microsoft Access. If you're a big organization or you're going to have multi-years and you want to model different plans, you're probably going to need something like SQL Server or Oracle, or even some of the other relational databases that scale to very large volumes of data. And then ultimately, we're going to need a nice analytics layer here to interact with the data, publish out the reports and the results. We've touched on a little bit of this, but from a technical side, we've got challenges with the data. And some of the biggest challenges are we have different types of compensation. We have different specialty variations. Quality metrics, that's a whole, own bucket of challenges, which is getting the data, making sure the data is actually measuring what we think it's measuring. And then all these other adjustments, whether it's guarantees, base salaries, or other stipends that might be tied to leadership or research that have to be included into the models. And then benchmarks. What are the right benchmarks? Where do we get them? Can we get them in a timely fashion? And how do we relate them to all of the data sets above? In many cases, we have multiple years of data that need to be accommodated. Over the years, we had one organization that we've worked with had every year the physician was hired was tied to the compensation contract, if you will. So they were using different reporting years for RVUs for each individual based on their hire date. So you run into those kind of modeling complexities where we have not just one data point for RVUs, but multiple data points that are variant per provider or physician. And then the last piece, which is one of the challenges that really can address timeliness, is if we can't get all the data, or if we're using benchmark or survey data that might not be coming back for 60 or 90 days, or payer data that might not be coming back for even a long time period, how do we report then and anticipate getting a data model that's structured and works? But with that, let's jump in and look at what can happen now. And so what you're seeing here on my screen, this is a modeled out physician compensation data set where we've tried to include, and you'll see these in the presentation of dashboards and visualizations that we're going to share. But if you look on my screen here, on the left side of the screen are all different components. Across the top of the screen, though, then we have the ability to, slice and dice through data. So once we've modeled our data, we've addressed the timeliness concerns, we can start to filter through the data. We can also look at, top percentiles. We can look at the projected where the physicians are going to end up. We can look at every modeled month and see how the compensation has changed. And of course, we can now start to rank and sort and filter through the data to understand how much has been earned, what's been paid, and is there a net difference here? And then through the analytics, you can start to ask questions. So I want to look at all the physicians that have guarantees, and I can quickly see these physicians have earned less than they've been paid, but because they're on a guarantee, there's no amount owed, right? So the analytics make it very easy to start slicing and dicing and translating through the data, at least from a management perspective, where we can go. That makes it easy to do some of the things that management might need. But Scott, where do we go with the analytics from this point?
So Russ, I think it's great what you just showed right there as far as a management perspective. And I think it's, being able to rank and stratify and really quickly move through the data and really help understand what's going on. That's really good from a management perspective. But I've worked with a lot of physicians. I've done it for a long time, and I'll tell you, what you were looking at right there isn't really going to be particularly engaging to the physicians themselves. I don't know that the physicians really want to have to dive through a bunch of numbers and a bunch of calculations and apply filters and tools and things like that. If we want to engage the physicians in the process itself, we need to give them better information that way. I think they really want to understand what's going on and what's projected out, and they want to be able to get a quick view of that. They want to know, what are the metrics that are involved in the highest levels of their, productivity compensation, and then what are the incentives that are there? What are they doing? What particular behaviors are they in charge of that are not meeting performance standards or are meeting performance standards? And really understanding and engaging them, because it's going to require a behavioral change in order to do this. So you need to engage the physicians in the process itself. And there are a few ways that we found that are really helpful and best practice in doing this. I think the first one, obviously, is to provide them with monthly dashboards. It shows them where they are, shows them where we think they're headed, and really illustrates as much detail as possible as far as the calculations go, as far as where they are and where they think they're going to go. And then maybe even give them a calculator to say, well, I want to be somewhere else. What are the particular things I need to do in order to get there? So maybe a good example of a dashboard will be, what we see here on this particular slide. You can see right there, we're communicating right away, right up at the top. Here's the way the compensation is calculated. You can see the RVU tiers for productivity that are in place as far as the agreements that are made. And then you can go right away down and show each individual provider, here, month by month, was your productivity. Here are the tiers that were met. They can see they don't have to digest a bunch of numbers. They know right away where they were, what were their good months, what were their poor months. And then we can project out, here's where we think you're going to end the year, and based upon that, here's your RVU tier and what your anticipated salary is going to be. We can show them the incentive pools and the factors that go into those incentive pools, whether they've met those criteria, whether they've not met those criteria. We can show them the clinic goals, whether the clinic goals that they're accountable to help achieve have been met or not, and if there's things that they can do and put in place in order to do that. So the calculations are there, they're set up, they show the productivity factors, they show the incentive factors, how it's all calculated out, and then you can see their charts that they can graph quick trends. Are they trending up productivity-wise? Are they trending down productivity-wise? Are the spikes something that are easy to explain and understand? And then look at the final chart to see what percentage of their compensation is still kind of left on the table right now by not meeting incentive or clinic goals that, you know, possibly they could help reach by the end of the period, which would get them that much additional extra compensation moving forward. So that's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is what we like to call quick answers. Again, we're not digesting a bunch of numbers. We're giving answers to questions through indicators that are there. So you can see right away on the left-hand side, yes, no, I met this criteria, I have not met this criteria. Do I have something that I can do to be better? You can look at the calculations again of where they are, what the comp calculations are, but in this dashboard, we're giving them a little bit of power as well. I call this but I want to go to Fiji dashboard. Is there a factor that they can go in and modify? They say, I want to be at this particular compensation level. What increases in productivity do I need to see? What increases in the incentive goal do I need to see? What are factors that I can change in my behavior between now and the end of the year in order to get the compensation that I had set as a personal goal for myself? Those are some of the things that can be particularly engaging and helpful, instead of just giving them reports of here's where you are, here's where we think you're going to be. Well, you want to be somewhere else. Here are some ideas of things that you can do to change. You need to see an additional 3 patients a day, and here's what we can do to help get those in so that you have the productivity increases that you desire. All of these factors go into, you know, really helping the providers visualize their performance, what they've done from a productivity standpoint, understand the calculations, and then tell them what they need to do in order to get to a different level or the desired level they want to see. Russ, have you seen some additional ways to look at, you know, visualizations that are out there?
Sure, Scott. And visualization certainly is one way to engage physicians. You know, the tools today, many organizations, you know, I know are pursuing tools like Tableau, Click. The tool visualization that you're seeing here on the screen is a tool from MicroStrategy, and their visualization module called Visual Insight is a tool that we're showing here. So the same data, Scott, that you just shared can be, you know, we still have sort of the core metrics in place. You could hide these if you just wanted to do a full visualization. But we're really looking at the exact same metrics Scott just showed on the prior dashboards. You can see which part of incentives are being missed, which parts have been earned. You can see the plan components in the center of the screen. We can see, you know, in August, this physician had a huge drop in productivity, as well as you can see their performance against benchmark here right at the bottom of the screen. So automating the analytics and driving it through, whether we use dashboards that can be emailed, published out in Excel, you know, whatever template or presentation layer you want to use, or we want to use some of the newer visualization technology, you know, it really comes back to having the right analytics calculated. Here's another visualization. Now, what's great about this is the same analytics, when they're rolled up, now make a very powerful management tool. And so what you're looking at here is the same metrics, where we have both incentive and quality metrics on the screen, but now we're looking at it at a department level, which really is where the power of analytics comes into play. When we want to start looking across populations of our physicians, not patients, but, you know, physicians, and start to understand, for example, here very quickly we can see this is what cardiology has earned the physicians, this is what's been paid out, okay? So we can see quickly, you know, paid and earned. If we want to just look at cardiology, we click on cardiology, we can very quickly see within cardiology most of our physicians, their production performance is at the top tier, but with the analytics, if I want to just highlight the bottom corner, I can very quickly see these 2 physicians are only at the lower benchmark. We can also see that one of the 2 physicians here is hitting both the incentive pool and the quality goals here. And so you can see right away, looking at the top of the screen, that this physician is failing on their patient satisfaction score, which is something they can improve on. We can also quickly see where each of these physicians is being paid or projected to be paid out come year end. So this is, you know, one of the nice things about visualization is when we start to bring that into the analytics, it truly is a point and click drag and drop. Looking down again at the incentive pool, I could highlight just all the positions that are missing the incentive pool on both goals. And if you noticed our simulated, modeled plan here, they had to hit both their quality score and their patient satisfaction score to get this goal, this bonus incentive, and they're missing on both. So these are the physicians that are probably going to need help and performance improvement in 2 areas, versus if I just wanted to highlight all the physicians in the orange here, you can quickly see which ones are hitting on one score but missing on the other. And of course, our top performers are up here hitting on both of their incentive goals. So it makes it very easy to, point and click and isolate and look at a particular group of the physicians and how their compensation now is reflected and where there are performance gaps. One of the nice advantages of visualization. Scott, do you want to speak to other ways that once we have it in the analytics, we can use the physician compensation, if you will, the analytics that are now in place, and what are some of the other usages for them?
Well, I tell you, one of the things that I really like about what you just showed in that management perspective is that there are ways to help out, other areas, not just the providers in there. With I know working in finance, I really appreciated the opportunity to have really good calculations and projections for budgeting or maybe accruals for bonuses. I know people in HR and others, like having that information available to be able to, slice and dice and drill to areas that they need to see. That it's good from a management perspective. But I'll tell you where there's a real value in the use of these analytics is if we're going to be making these changes. If we're going to be projecting future plans, that we can take those calculations, model them out, and really look at the impacts before we put things into place. And it helps us be really accurate, and it helps us to look at different levels of granularity to understand what are the things that we're changing, who's it going to impact the most, and how's that going to work. Now, when we're looking at changing plans, I'll put forth a voice of warning. We've done this a lot, and we've met with a lot of people, and working with the physicians we worked with, we know nothing really upsets them more than changing staff, changing their office, or changing the way that they're paid. And you can really understand that. They've got a personal stake. They're invested in this, and it really impacts the way their lifestyle, their personal lifestyle. So we really want, again, them to be engaged, but we also want to make sure that we're doing what's right for the organization as a whole, and that includes doing what's right for our providers as well. So some key steps that we found to making these modifications and changing comp plans as smoothly as possible. The first one is don't just think you have the right model the first time. Look at multiple models, change the variables, change the weights, change the things that are included and excluded, and really look at it and understand, A, are you driving to the right place, and B, how's it going to impact not just the organization as a whole, but how's it going to impact the Department of Medicine? How's it going to impact family practice? How's it going to impact surgery? Each of those are going to have a little bit different ways that they're going to be impacted. And then even look down at the individual provider level and understand how individual providers are going to be there. You're going to have some providers that are going to really benefit from this. You're going to have some providers that are going to have to struggle to make some behavioral changes in order to be doing as well as they were under the current plan. And what's important is to make sure that they have enough notice to understand what's going into it, to make the changes and modifications in the way that they do business in order to be there. So look at the ways that behaviors are going to change, and look at the ways that everyone is going to be impacted by that. So Russ, I know, is there a way that a visualization can kind of show us that quickly and easily?
Sure. There's a couple different ways that can be accommodated, and this kind of drives back to if we built out our compensation, our current compensation into an analytical model, now we have it in the analytics, to be able to project or remodel those parameters or add new components or data sources to our plan. That's just a function now of adding data and being able to do calculations on various plans. And so what I have up on the screen here now is the same analytics. We're just looking at the numeric piece of it. But in the yellow, you can see these are all the proposed metrics, the calculations, so our projected performance year to date against our actual RVUs generated. We can see the projected compensation plan, what's been earned, what would be earned under the new plan, and we can very quickly then start to sort, rank, filter, and look for who's going to gain on the new comp plan versus the old plan, and potentially who's going to see a decrease in their compensation. And of course, we can continue to slice and dice and filter through the data. So Scott, bringing this in and calculating, again, the challenge of defining the plans, but once you've done that, and if you have it in your analytics, I can now bring this tool back to you and say, how do we use this to assess, do we have a good plan, or who's going to be impacted most by the plan?
Right, and if you look at something like this, this is really a great tool because, again, you can move through the data so quickly. If I did something like place a sort to look at my higher performers on my 90th percentile or whatever, I can see here are my providers who are already performing at the level that they're going to be just fine with this new plan, that they may actually even be better off than what they are in the current plan. But there are going to be providers who aren't that way. So if we filter on those who may be having some challenges, these are the ones that we can work with directly to address what are the things what are the particular gaps that they have, what are the particular shortfalls that they have, what are the metrics where they need to change the way that they do things in order to increase those metrics and maybe place less focus on the prior metrics which led to them being successful under the old plan. How can they change to be more successful under the new plan? And again, giving them notice and helping them understand ahead of time where we're going and where we want to be and why we're moving in that direction is something that'll be really helpful for them. I think another way to do that is similar to the dashboards we created before. You can put forth in a dashboard pretty easily like plan shadowing or some parallel reporting where we're showing clearly and directly, here's where you are right now. Here's what your calculations are under the current plan. Based upon the new plan, the calculations change this way, that there's going to be less of a factor here, there's going to be more weight added to these different components, and based upon what you're currently doing, here's where you're leaving salary on the table. Here are things that you can do to help the organization meet its goal, whether it's in the incentive pool, whether it's in the clinic goals, or whether it's in changing the productivity standards to which you've held yourself before. Each provider is going to be a little bit different in this, obviously, but they're going to see quickly and clearly what are the factors that are going to be involved in the new compensation plan that they need to modify their behavior in order to meet.
Excellent. Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I really think, in speaking with organizations, this report here really summarizes where organizations are headed, which is, and I know we saw a number of organizations in the poll earlier, but certainly from our experience in talking with organizations that we're either working with or discussing, what's going on with changes in their compensation, it really comes down to being able to notify and showcase, here's where we are, but here's where we're moving. I really like on this dashboard, how it's very easy to see green, green, red. There's something that we can improve on, or very clearly in this, donut graph here that 25% of the incentive is still available because we're not hitting those clinic goals. And that might not be directly attributable to the physician, but at least it allows the physician then to work with his or her peers or as an organization to focus so that this can be improved on to the benefit of ultimately the organization and then their patients. So, our recommendations for compensation management really can be summarized into 5 or so bullets here, which is it's imperative, especially with the changes, and I think we're going to continue to see more changes in healthcare. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody on this call. What you might be doing today and where you're headed tomorrow, you may be rolling out one plan and you're already having to think about designing and where your next plan is going to be. So having a robust set of analytics that allow you to both do calculations, modeling, and then publishing information, I think is essential for where we're headed and where we are today. You really need to be able to showcase all the metrics. I think the days in the past where you might just show the key productivity metric, this is how you're performing, or these are the collections related to your work effort, is not going to be enough to allow physicians to self-correct. And I think today people are more analytical savvy. They're looking for more information, and Scott, you mentioned transparency behind it, critical. And it's got to be easily calculated. So you really need automation behind the scenes. It's got to be a process that can be rolled up and delivered in a timely fashion, even if you have to use prior quarter patient satisfaction data on the current quarter, because you can't deliver that. I don't think you can wait 3, 6, 12 months to tell physicians how they're performing, so it's got to be timely. And certainly then your dashboards, your visualizations, whatever vehicle is appropriate to your culture and your organization, they need to have context. And also the ability to even be predictive to how do I improve? How do I increase my performance and my performance gaps? So with that, I just want to highlight for a few seconds here, PDS, our core competencies, are physician compensation analytics and dashboarding, staging and data modeling of healthcare data, blending data from multiple sources, and that's just critical in physician comp reporting. But as an organization, these are things that we're dealing with and tackling day in and day out. We have a tremendous amount of experience with dashboards and visualizing data, whether it's with some of the tools you saw through the webinar here, or with tools that you might be trying to implement. Most of our customers, if they're not using a tool from PDS, they're working with the major tools, the analytical vendors in the market. In addition to the vendors that I mentioned, companies like, IBM Cognos, MicroStrategy, Microsoft are all popular tools that we've helped organizations be successful with for delivering dashboards. And then another key component is, do you have a good strategy for reporting, and how does that fit in with your organizational goals? And ultimately, compensation directly ties into that.